today's talk. Jackson, Devin, hope you're doing well. Everyone watching today, really pumped to give you a little bit of insight into Jackson's world. I've known Jackson for a little over a year, probably. A great intro from Lewis, our one of our previous like virtual ed series guests, and I think this is a good time to bring Jackson on today because there is a lot of work life balance talk in the business space right now. And we've actually worked together in the past on trying to identify some ways to make my life easier as a business owner. And so this is really cool to bring it full circle and get some of the content that I've learned from him and back out to you guys. So there is I'll let him do a formal like kind of background into himself, but few like key points. Former startup founder, went to become a Zen monk for a handful of years. Was it right?
Months, but yeah,
Months.
yeah.
Okay. And is now doing a ton of research around happiness and business and just really helping people identify ways to make their lifestyles more sustainable. So, wanting to give a really cool like quote unquote keynote today about some of the best practices around that. So, Jackson, I'll hand it over to you and give you a quick couple minutes to intro yourself, and then we'll jump into it.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that, Sean and Devin. Thanks for the opportunity. But you hit on really a lot of it. So years ago, I had this realization of like, well, I want to be really rich and successful and be a billionaire investor, and that's really great. But like, why do I actually want to do that? And finally, and I always challenge people to do this, like I call it the different levels of why. So you want to, double your business. Why do you want that? And then once you get your answer, why do you want that? Why do you want that? And I kept going. Basically, it was like, well, all of these things I want, what I really want is happiness. And so I was like, well, being a billionaire investor sounds like a pain in the ass. What if I just study happiness instead? So I created the world's first major in happiness at the University of Alabama. Went on to do research, teach a course there on happiness. I now offer one online, The Science of Happiness at Work. As Sean mentioned, a few months living as a Zen monk, then worked in management, and the last 3 years or so run my own small business, which is really bringing this research around happiness and human flourishing to military, first responders, and small to mid-sized businesses, helping them with culture transformation.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I would love to maybe get once you wrap up your talk today. I'd be curious to hear some of your takeaways from that monk experience and how that's maybe relayed to some of the stuff you're working on now, like how that's like transformed some of your lifestyle around your day to day in business. So
That stood out to me too, because I thought, how many times do we actually get away from our lives of how busy and tech oriented they are?
Yeah.
yeah, I think the most simple thing is like put your phone down and like check out at 5 p.m. and but like you officially checked out. Like
Mhm.
there wasn't there wasn't this like day where you have a couple hours to yourself. It's like you are permanently to yourself for an
Mhm.
extended period of time. So I'm sure there's a lot that you took away from that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Why don't we come back to it and remind me? Because there's something even you can make a note to of call it the ability to walk away, which I will elaborate on more later. But I think is really important for
Love that.
business owners, startup people, entrepreneurs, etc.
Cool. Let's get into it whenever you're
All
ready.
right. Yeah. Well, I'll start dropping you in here about this was probably about 3 months after I quit my job in management at a really big company to start my own company, which was really, as I shared, around this passion of like, I know I basically want to be like a happiness nerd, happiness researcher, professor, but I don't want to deal with academia. So I'm going to somehow try to take this into organizations, help business owners, military, nonprofit, like whoever, help people like actually apply this happiness research to improve their results. And I got an email that afternoon from a 2-star general in the the National Guard, Wisconsin National Guard. And it's kind of like, well, I don't get a lot of emails from 2-star generals actually. And so I opened, and it was basically like confirming our contract. Like, we were going to train all of their battalion command teams on happiness, human flourishing, basically how to create a command climate. That's the term they use for culture in the military, that's really supportive of flourishing, well-being, happiness. And so it's like, wow, 3 months into this, and I'm like basically living my dream. I'm like, I wanted to be the small business owner. I'm doing it. Like, this is amazing. And kind of start to think, well, how long would that high, that happiness last? And it's like, wait, maybe a week, maybe a year, maybe a month. And then always when I'm giving keynotes, there's someone in the front row who's like 30 seconds. And I'm like, dude, you must be miserable. You got 30 seconds from that. Um, but the truth is, I think that evening I was like, okay, I got to celebrate this. So in rural Western PA, when you want to celebrate, you want to go buy a bottle of champagne, you go to the local gas station that's Sheets. So I'm like, I'm going to get this bottle of champagne. And, on my way there, I think some guy cut me off, almost drove me off the road. And it was as if all that happiness, kind of flew out the window. Right. And I'm guessing we can all experience this in some ways, right? We've all been there on some level, right? Especially as business owners, it's like, oh, this week's going to be chaos, right? And then I'll slow down. Or, oh, once I get to through this project, or once I close on this house, or once we hit this sales goal, or we just get this new person onboarded. And it's always like, and then, and then, and then. And then oftentimes we get there and it's like, okay, like this is good, but it's, on to the next thing. And so it got me thinking, what is really the relationship between happiness and success? And naturally, I turned to some of the happiness research out there done in fields like social sciences and positive psychology. And it turns out that in a lot of ways, we really do get this all wrong. We kind of have it uh, backwards because I think it's kind of how we manage, it's how we parent, it's how we think, right? We tend to get this equation of like, if I just work harder and achieve more, I'll be more successful, and then I'll get more happiness. And that's wonderful. I'm not anti-success. But it turns out, rather surprisingly, this pattern also exists in reverse. Okay, that investing in our happiness, which we can think of as generally positive emotion, generally feeling satisfied with life, and generally feeling positive about the future. Kind of say it's like across each dimension of time. I'm happy with my life, I'm happy in my life, and I'm happy when I think about my future. If we invest in those things, it actually helps us to be more successful. And now, right off the bat here, I want to be certain, because that can sound a little bit like the woo woo, just, manifesting positivity thing. And if you're into that, that's great. But this is not what that is. I'll explain a few of the research studies on this. So, first, we can look at the frequent benefits of positive affect. Does happiness lead to success? Okay, that is a meta study by King, Diener, and Liuber-Mirsky, which a meta study, okay, that's a study of studies, basically. So, looking at all these different experiments or studies or research papers and try to tease out common patterns. And what they find is, strangely enough, people who are happier tend to engage in behaviors and develop capabilities that lead them to actually then get more success in all these different areas. So we see that equation is kind of inverted. People who tend to be happier tend to do better in their close social relationships. Okay, so they're better at networking, they're better at making friends, they tend to earn more money over the course of their careers, they tend to be more creative, more engaged, better at problem solving, and they even, tend to have better physical health, which is kind of surprising. There's been studies that look at people's emotional tendencies and immune system function. So, right, the big through line here I started to realize is like, wow, if you actually, as an individual, can systematically improve your level of happiness and well being, you're going to get more out of yourself. And then if you take that to a team or an organization, you're going to get more motivation, engagement, performance out of that team. A few of the studies, too, I'll even double click on that I think will be relevant for this audience. Cognitive performance, okay, if you're a small business owner or in that space, okay, probably important to you. Happiness almost makes you more intelligent. And what I mean by that is there's many studies that involve taking people into the lab, emotionally priming them in a certain way. So it might be like I show you, some fun, positive videos or give you a little gift, or I show you like a really sad, disturbing image. And people, when they're in a good mood, perform better on assessments of creativity, problem solving, learning, and retention, kind of access to memory. Even one that looked at physicians. Okay, so these are people solving really complex problems. They gave them a made up case. Here's your patient. Here's all their symptoms, blah, blah, blah. Then you have two experts evaluating them. And when they're in a good mood, they solve the case about 50% faster with fewer cognitive errors. So across the board, we see cognitive performance enhanced when you're in a positive mood. About 2 years ago, Oxford University found happy workers are 13% more productive, even when they work the same amount of hours. Happy workers just get more done and get more results. In sales, in the 1990s, Marty Seligman looked at optimism, which again is kind of like the positive outlook on the future. And he found that people who pass an optimism assessment in sales versus their more pessimistic counterparts outsold by about 34% over 2 years. So anything having to do with sales team revenue generation and sales team retention, that's huge. And finally, one of the, maybe most interesting ones, and if you're thinking about your small business, okay, this still applies. They can measure this in the stock market. So I learned about this at the Happiness and Leadership Institute at Harvard. They work with a company called Irrational Capital that develops these funds that invest in companies with higher benchmarks of employee well-being. Those funds, if you want to look one up, you can HAPI, happy is the ticker. Those funds actually have outperformed the market to date. So to sum that up, across all these different areas, this traditional belief that's just so ingrained in us in our culture that if you just work harder and get to be more successful, then kind of someday over the horizon you get happiness. Okay, success is great, but investing in your happiness first leads you to more success. And by the way, we've actually done this. Okay, 2 case studies I'll tease because next week in part 2 of the session we'll go a bit deeper into those. One was a battalion in the Army National Guard. We worked with them on a culture transformation that led to a 34% turnaround in recruiting production. They met all their state missions for the first time in 6 years. And then on the small to mid-sized business, trucking company came to us with severe operational issues that really was around their culture and ways of working. We helped them drive an 80% reduction in their claims cost over about a year, saving $3 million and having one of their best years in the last decade for profitability. So this stuff really works. Now that sets us up here for maybe our last 5 minutes. Well, what can you do about this? So again, next week we'll go more taking this to your company. For now, I want to focus on you and your performance. So here's a simple perspective and practice you can take away. I want you to think about happiness and just remember the phrase, happiness is learned. Okay. Happiness is learned. Now, what I mean by that is that through study and through practice, we learn to be happier. No matter what your baseline is, high or low, we can improve. So study means that you acquire knowledge of how it works. Okay? And then practice is you take that knowledge and apply it. So you can literally think about anything you've ever done, pretty much. Driving a car, if you play golf, you have a sport or a hobby, if you have a certain skill set in your business that you operate, sales, finance, marketing, etc. It's like you were not very good the first time you ever did it. And then what happened? You probably watched a video, you probably read a book, you probably took a course, you probably had like a mentor in your business. Okay, so again, you acquired the knowledge. What is the recipe? How does it work? What are the kind of causes and skills there? But that wasn't enough. You had to actually then take all that and take action, put it into practice. So swing the golf club, spend your day running the business, getting on the sales call, getting behind the wheel of the car. Okay, the analogies are endless, but through study and practice, you learn. And so the $1 billion question I often say is, how could happiness be any different? Well, it's not. And I say it's $1 billion question because I was actually at a seminar years ago by a guy who, amongst his many accomplishments, he wrote a New York Times best-selling book on money. In that book, he interviewed 14 billionaires with a B, and he said, probably like 3 or 4 of them were genuinely happy. So remember that. You study and you practice, you learn, and maybe that's something even $1 billion can't get you. So what exactly do we study and do we practice? Well, say there's a simple recipe for happiness, really. If you learn about how these things work and then you practice cultivating these things, you will be happier. And think of it as a checklist, okay? BPR, biology, psychology, and relationships. So you've got your physical health with things like sleep, nutrition, exercise. You've got your mental health, so mostly positive thoughts, beliefs, emotions. And then you got relationship health with love and social connection. Literally, if you just have those, you cannot help but be happy. So, like, literally, it's that simple. If you just focus on those ingredients, you will be happy. And so I say, don't focus on happiness. Focus on the ingredients for happiness, your biology, psychology, and relationships. How could you either study a bit and or practice a bit with those each and every day? Okay, so imagine for me as like a business owner, and this is a lot of the stuff I coach people on to your point earlier, Sean, about like, work-life balance. It maybe doesn't even have to be work-life balance. Maybe you're still working 60 hours a week, but imagine you took 20 minutes in the morning. And by the way, if you don't have 20 minutes to set up your day to be in a better state, to be more successful and effective, and hell, maybe even enjoy yourself a little bit more. If you don't have 20 minutes for that, you need to get a life because everyone has 20 minutes. So you could say you're going to do 15 minutes in the gym, right? Hit a sprint on the treadmill, go for a run around the block, do a few sets of the weights, 15 minutes, whatever. Then you're going to go upstairs, okay? And you're going to do a 4-minute meditation or a 4-minute breathing exercise or 4 minutes writing down things you're thankful for, right? Something that trains your mind to be in a kind of more positive or beneficial state. And then for your last, whatever, we're at 19 minutes now, so 1 minute, you're going to do something to nurture a relationship. So it could be writing a handwritten thank you note to a client, handwritten thank you note to an employee, sending a text to a friend, giving a quick call to someone you care about, right? Or even just actually interesting research out of U Chicago. Even these micro interactions where you just talk to a stranger casually or like give a compliment or buy the person behind you their coffee. Any of those things is going to deepen your relationship health. And the longest running psychological study of adult development that's ever been done at Harvard University showed that the quality of your relationships determines the quality of your life. So it's like, boom, right there, 20 minutes, you just knocked out biology, psychology, relationships. If you do that every day, again, I don't care how much you work. I don't care how the business is going. I don't care what your natural tendency is. Like, you're going to be a little bit happier each and every day. And so that would be my challenge to you. And that's what I'll, leave you with is maybe a question of not even work-life balance, but maybe we can call it work-life happiness. Like, what would you do coming out of here each day, or maybe even each week, to invest in the ingredients for happiness? You're studying and you're practicing each day and each week, physical health, mental health, relationship health. What would that look like for you? Make it easy, make it a daily, weekly routine. And that's what, Sean, I know we coached on that. Just setting up a few of those small, simple habits, getting into your calendar. I often say the 5W rule: who will do what, by when, where, and why. You hit all those W's for yourself, simple implementation plan, protect your time so that you can invest in life's most important asset, happiness.
Love this, man. Love this, man. To
Awesome.
not to lose this last point, but I was gonna ask, like, what is one sort of activity or one thing somebody can do to make sure they have a little bit of time in their day to start focusing on those things. And I think it's different for everyone, whether they like to work out, whether they like to, read, whatever it is. But to the last point where you're saying, taking 20 minutes in the morning or whatever it is, one thing that we were doing early on was time blocking the same thing every other day, right? There's a 90-minute block in the calendar for the gym every other day. Doesn't matter when it happens. It's just a floating block that I can move around throughout the day, right? So if something random comes up, okay, I'll just move it down 30 minutes. Like
Mhm.
I'll go a little later. But what I used to do is convince myself that without having it on the calendar, I'll just remember to go, right? Like I love the gym. It'll automatically pop up. I'll go no matter what gets in the way, but you keep pushing it, you keep pushing it, you keep pushing it. And then 3, 4, 5 days goes by and I'm like, man, I feel terrible. I'm, to the whole point about this, I feel very unhappy now with my week because I didn't prioritize this thing. And the only solution was to really put it on the calendar, and I could have done it at 10 p.m. or 6 a.m. It doesn't matter, but I would have had this physical thing in my calendar that would have helped me prioritize that. So maybe that's like one takeaway for people, uh, to at least set a standard for yourself, right? To make sure that that thing gets done, to feel a little bit happier throughout your week.
Yeah, absolutely. And I often think that's a big challenge. And that's what I work on a lot of times when I do coach like business owners or entrepreneurs is a shift from a reactive to proactive mode overall, full stop, so to speak, right? But then you can make some of that proactive time around, yeah, your physical health, your mental health, whatever. One of the guys I coached, he's owns a snow removal business, but like he went on this amazing transformation of like 75 hard, and I think he lost like 30 pounds and put on a bunch of muscle and was feeling way better physically.
Is free?
And
Is he from Ottawa?
no, he's from Washington State.
Okay. Okay.
But
There's another guy that sounds exact, like literally snow removal business, lost 30 pounds. I was like, is this the same guy?
that's great.
That's
Okay,
crazy.
I gotta match them up.
Yeah.
But with him, it was like, yeah, like setting up the perfect week, and you're not going to hit your perfect week every week, but having kind of these just core pillar, non negotiable, like, hey, yeah, based on the nature of your role, especially if you're managing a team, it might be that of your 9-hour workday, 6 of those need to be reactive. And that's fine, but there's no excuse for not having, let's say, 3 of those hours be proactive, or whether the week before or the day before you're saying, like, these are my most important tasks, again, personal and or professional. They're blocked on the calendar as kind of my pillars, and then I will fill in the rest reactively around that. Again, it's very simple, but I feel many people don't have that kind of system for their perfect week.
Yeah. This is almost like lifestyle design in a
Mhm.
way, right? It's like, what's the
Yeah.
ideal day look like for me? And then work backwards.
Mhm.
It's like, do I like to wake up early? Do I like to go to the gym at 2 p.m. versus 7 a.m.? Like for me, I'm like, I'm never lifting a weight at 6 o'clock in the morning. It's just not
Yeah.
going to happen. So, I'm not going to get my workout in before the day, so I have to or I have to chop my days in half and do something, early afternoon, and then, start finishing things off later in the evening. So but Devin, does anything come to mind when you hear lifestyle design, happiness, lifestyle structure? Like what comes to mind there?
Yeah, so like a couple of things. You said ingredients for happiness. I love that. And I also saw, I think it was just today, you posted something on LinkedIn talking about how you started the happiness major and all of that. Like zooming out, I mean, that seems like a monumental thing to do. It was enough for me to get through college, let alone like influencing the higher education system. So how did that even come about?
Mhm. Yeah, I was really fortunate with the University of Alabama that they provide almost kind of an ecosystem for students to do something like this. Now, they had never had something like this before, but there's a program there that I really love called New College, which is it's interdisciplinary. So it's designed to facilitate people who want to pull from various disciplines and kind of self design their own depth study. Now, most of them are going to mean more traditional things like, okay, you're really interested in environmental engineering and business. So you're going to create like an environmental business depth study. I was definitely the first that did one in happiness, but really it was like pulling from different courses and a lot of independent study as well. So I took online courses from like Yale, the science of well-being, the science of happiness at Berkeley, positive psychology at UPenn. Then I would also do things like, okay, this is maybe a hack for anyone listening that doesn't even apply to happiness, but I think I've discovered maybe how to become an expert in like 3 months in any field, which is one of the things I did to get credit for at school. Was like, okay, instead of taking a class, how about I'm going to watch the top 10 or something like that TED Talks on happiness of all time, take all of them, and then do a big report on it. And I feel like after that, I was like just insane. So, right, you could apply that to like any subject. But those were the sorts of things I did there and ended up, yeah, getting this interdisciplinary bachelor's in happiness. So I think the first of its kind. And I don't know if they'll have other happiness students follow me in the future. There aren't always the best career prospects in that field. I think I'm an outlier there. But yeah, that's what led to it.
Well, I can see that there's a shift, right? Then I have friends who are all around the world and they have they're in different culture. It's like you mentioned culture a few times through your talk, and I can see that I mean, even the case of technology advancing productivity, there is a limit to how much productivity will shape things in a way where we get to the point where we're like, okay, we have our productivity now. Now we can optimize for happiness. We can optimize for other factors. And you even said happiness in a great way, which was outside of just one thing. You mentioned it in what I saw more of like a circle.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of view it holistically in that sense of not just the biology, psychology, and relationships, but thinking about, yeah, being happy in your life. So you have these generally, let's say you have emotional intelligence, which to me is just really the ability to influence your own psychological state. So it's like, don't spend a lot of time in the negative, spend a bit more time in the positive. At the same time, when you step back and evaluate your life as a whole, okay, feeling like, yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with things overall. And then again, that optimism. And then you can just deconstruct each of those. So and I know because I'm writing a book on this right now, so forgive me, but that life satisfaction usually comes from sense of meaning and a sense of achievement. I have this sense of competence and self-efficacy, and when I step back, my sort of things I've done outweigh my expectations. Okay, so that's all in the past. In the present, it's mostly about perfectly being present and developing emotional intelligence, which is your ability to recognize your emotional state and then manage it. Okay, so if you get that right, you're managing your day to day. And then your optimism is actually a function of something called explanatory style in psychology, which basically means that when bad things happen to you, you don't take them personally, you don't view them as permanent, and you don't make it pervasive, right? So you can imagine if I had a client, didn't close the sales call, I might say, oh my gosh, it was all my fault. And then I might say, yeah, I really suck at everything. And then I might say, oh, and I'm never going to get another sale. When in reality, the client just didn't even have the money needed to purchase the service. All right. So it's not really personal. And then you're going to go close the next one. And even though the sales thing didn't go well, I'm really good at financial analysis and managing my team and being a, dad or whatever. So you can start to see that sort of a method of perceiving things that shapes your optimism level. So
Love that. Jackson, thanks so much for today. This was actually very, very, I have a lot of takeaways, I guess I could say. And I think Devin does too. And so I think next week we're going to chat a little bit more about how to actually do this in your personal and professional life as a solo business owner, as a large team business owner. And so yeah, thanks again for jumping on and doing this. This was super cool. And how can people connect with you personally, and I hear you're actually writing a book as well. Do you have a timeline on when that's dropping?
Yeah, so a couple ways. If you enjoyed some of the like personal stuff and you enjoy maybe reading or educational videos, just check out happinessphd.com. Okay, that's where I kind of just do my thought leadership. And then if you like more of the maybe business stuff, or you're looking at maybe having me speak or do a session, or you want one-on-one coaching, you go to happinessmeansbusiness.com. That's where we do kind of our business solutions. And then, yeah, the book, I actually just wrote one about, well, it was just released about a month ago. It's called The Art of Falling Awake, which is a bit more short essays on mindfulness and spirituality. And then this next one, which will be kind of my theory of happiness, we'll have to stay tuned. I do have, yeah, probably like, let's call it the end of this year. But, there's plenty of irons in the fire.
Cool. And do you have any cool projects coming up, whether it's like in-person talks or anything that people can come out to or watch?
Yeah, let's see. So, again, always my YouTube posting stuff every week or every other week, which is kind of my best stuff on happiness, and also about to launch a 7-day happiness course there. So you can check that out. And then otherwise, yeah, if you happen to be in South Carolina in June for the South Carolina Trucking Association, if you happen to be in DC next Thursday for something, Cayman Islands at the end of May. Any listeners of the Cayman Islands? So yeah, I'll stop here. I do a lot of in-person events and conferences. So if you want to keep up with that, just follow me on like LinkedIn or whatever.
Love it. Cool, man.
Cool. Thanks, Jackson.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.